Hi, Sigi. Nice to see you again. I want to introduce what we're talking about today by asking you to tell us a little bit about this legend of Augustin, so famous in Vienna.
Yes, so the Augustin legend featuring a song that is popular until our days is about popular musician and a heavy drinker in the 17th century in Vienna. And so why is the man popular and why is his story is a legend? It turned out that it was the heavy days of the plague and in the 17th century in Vienna with thousands of deaths. And one day Augustine was drinking again and somehow sleeping off his hangover in the street, and he was cleaned off by those guys who were responsible to just collect all the victims from the streets, so all the plague victims, and throw them into a mass grave. And that's what they did with Augustine as well. And Augustine not just survived the plague, but also had his bagpipe with him and got safe because he was deciding, once he was sleeping off his hangover, he was deciding to play his bagpipe, and he was rescued by whomsoever, and then started to tell his story. So actually he profited from the crisis that was dangerous for him on the one hand, but on the other hand, he managed to deal with that. And that's kind of the analogy or kind of the metaphor I was using as a starter for the article about business agility in the age of COVID. And for sure, one can ask what this legend from the 17th century has to do with current business agility in our current crisis and lockdown. But we will find out during the conversation, right?
What came out of your conversations with your clients?
Brought together, a lot of observations and impressions, and then tried to sort them out and come up with, as I did, with 5 different ways of dealing with COVID, and also 5 different ways how agility played a role or not.
It resonates with me that there is the kind of one extreme of the people who are really desperate and seem to have no future, people in the travel industry, and for example, on the other side, people for whom there's no change or business is even stronger than before in the pharma and health space. But it's interesting, I think, if we look at the bigger picture of our journey together over the last more than 10 years, how do you see that COVID has kind of focused on the differences between, let's call them agile organizations or not agile organizations?
Apart from what you already mentioned, the 2 kinds of organizations, so to speak, the winners and the losers of the crisis, I see 3 types of dealing with COVID, with, as I said before, with 3 different ways of how agility comes into play. And the 3 types I would quickly point out as there is one kind of companies, and again, for sure there's limited data because I haven't done a study with, 100 participants, but rather randomly, so to speak, to really build on what we've seen and what we've learned. But the one type for sure are those companies who actually have agile in place or would call themselves an agile company. Also build on that during the crisis, but limit themselves to team agility. So what they are happy with is that the Scrum teams sprint well during the crisis, that the Kanban teams, even doing everything virtual, also work out quite nicely and perform well. Also design thinking or lean startup approaches and so on. This is the one type. For sure, the downside is that they don't invest anymore in improving their agility. So they don't get beyond the team level. They don't care about how to actually make sure that there is coordination beyond teams or between the teams and so on. The second type does this, so that they have kind of the DNA in place, or they have an agile DNA, if you want to call it like that. And they actually not just limit themselves to the team level, but really foster business agility or build on what they kind of do in a natural way, because they can't do any different, because that's how their company works. It works in an agile way. And what we've seen, and what is quite fascinating, is that those companies really invest heavily in also new ways, so innovative ways of dealing with customers during the crisis, but also internally. They do not cancel coaching or training measures, but they intensify, because they really believe that this is the way of, even if the business is weak, to go forward. And we can't say yet that they are more successful than others, but at least they are more agile in the way of how to deal with the crisis.
It is something I have been wondering about, is whether a crisis like COVID actually intensifies the kind of gap between those who are able to adapt and,
yes,
and those who aren't.
I would say so. I didn't actually mention the third type I was talking about, because that's something that worries me, because especially in large organizations, there is a tendency to kind of go back to the old traditional ways of managing and also dealing with agility then. And I even heard that from a real person, it's not invented, that we don't have any time, neither money to build on this agile crap. And what I mean is, with traditional ways of dealing, and this is kind of a backlash in my humble opinion, is that we again centralize decision making. We again come up with strategies behind closed doors. We limit communication to a top-down channel and so on. And again, this backlash worries me even more, because all of a sudden some people show up that were kind of hiding during the agile hype, and now use the opportunity to kind of come back. And besides of those companies who actually manage quite well, as you said, there is also a tendency to go back, build on this idea of the strong hand and the big leader, and neglect, if not contradict, to a lot of agile things they officially pretend to have achieved or build on. So they call themselves an agile company, but they aren't.
One of the things that resonates with me there is, if we put a complexity frame around this, and we consider that right in the beginning of the COVID crisis, when one can really say it firmly in the chaotic domain, you for sure need to make fast decisions. You don't have time to go and do a lot of analysis or a lot of dialogue. And so the idea of the strong leader can be useful. But now that we are kind of well into what we all understand is quite a long event of firstly dealing with COVID, which is apparently not going to go away until we have a vaccine, which is going to take a year or two. Plus, we have the financial crisis that is kind of catalyzed by this, and where we're still dealing with the aftermath, really, of the 2008 crisis. So we don't have the same economic levers that we had before. So there is a very real risk, if not the reality, of serious economic consequences of this whole thing. So now we are in a space where we really need to take a complexity approach and think. So in other words, all the analysis in the world doesn't give us, and all the expertise in the world doesn't find us the answers. We have to try things, we have to experiment, we have to probe the system. And so it's this idea of the kind of leadership taking the stance of, we know best and we're going to tell people what to do is exactly the opposite of what you need in this situation. You really have to have the broadest possible group of people sensing in your organization what's going on, being in contact with the customers, understanding how they're doing, understanding what they need, what they might need that's different from what they needed before. Just reinforcing the relationship. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, I agree.
For me, we need to amplify this distribution of autonomy and authority in the organization so that decisions can be made by people at the right level. I mean, we have to continue to build trust, to build psychological safety in organizations. I was watching actually just yesterday a video with a very well-known psychologist talking about the risk of fear in these traumatic situations and how, what I've just been talking about, just maintaining relationships. So this idea of, what people are calling social distancing is a misnomer. It's actually physical distancing. We actually need social nearness rather than social distancing in order to overcome the physical distancing.
Yeah.
So these are very real human problems, not only for organizations, but, and organizations are what? They're just social constructions of humans.
I like the idea of amplifying or intensifying social nearness. And what I've seen, or what turned out, is that there is a certain necessity to combine or actually build on this old triangle of inform people, help them to really understand what agility is about or how to use agility to deal with the crisis if we transfer it to our current situation. And that includes for sure this kind of social nearness, or at least also includes emotions and not just, so if we talk about information, it's not just pragmatic stuff. And the third thing is that we give people the chance to really practice and help them to build, so even build new capabilities during the crisis, because for sure they are needed. It's not just continuing with the old stuff, right?
Yeah. So Sigi, given our context for today about business agility in the age of COVID-19, what for you is the one takeaway that you would leave our audience with?
I'd say that my main takeaway is about how to deal with this crisis, especially in two regards. The one is more externally driven, so stay in touch with your customers and scan the market as good as you can. And on the other hand, internally, stick with team bridging and hierarchy bridging conversations, because that's what you need when it is about business agility. It's not just agile teams. It's really like what is going on between teams and between different levels. And that's my main takeaway. How about you?
Yes, I think what you say resonates with my observation that in this time of physical distancing, it's been so important to find ways to get near to customers without overwhelming them with information, but really taking care of the relationship human to human.
Makes sense. Cool. That's what it is.
Yes, so I want to thank you for being here today. It's been great fun to hook up again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, my friend. Until next time.